She was the kind of person who could icily disappear in a crowd, someone who never demanded attention and often preferred the quiet corners of life. People around her noticed her reserved nature, sometimes mistaking it for shyness or lack of confidence. But those who knew her well understood that there was much more beneath the surface. She had a gentle strength, the kind that didn't need to shout or show off. Music was her sanctuary, her escape, her way of expressing things she couldn't put into words. Her days were simple. She would wake up early, make a small breakfast, and get ready for work. She loved routine, the comfort of predictability, the feeling of small accomplishments stacking quietly throughout the day. At work, she was diligent, thorough, and kind to everyone she encountered. Some people admired her silently, but she never sought recognition. Praise was not what she lived for. It was the music in her heart that mattered most. On one ordinary afternoon, she found herself attending a social event she had reluctantly agreed to go to. It wasn't her scene at all, filled with people who loved to talk louder than necessary, who measured themselves by how much attention they could command. She felt out of place, like a calm river flowing through a noisy city. Her instincts told her to stay quiet, observe, and avoid unnecessary interactions. But she also knew that sometimes life required stepping slightly out of comfort zones. As she moved through the room, she noticed the usual things: people laughing loudly, talking over each other, trying to impress those around them. It all felt so superficial to her, yet she tried to ignore it. Then she saw him. He had a presence that drew attention without effort, a confident smile, and an air of superiority. He was the type of person who liked to dominate conversations to make others feel small without them even noticing immediately. He scanned the room, eyes sharp, always calculating, and then they landed on her. She noticed him looking, but she didn't react. She kept her focus, pretending not to see the subtle smirk that seemed directed at her. Yet, there was something in his gaze that suggested he had made a decision about her, a judgment that he would act on. He didn't waste time. With a voice loud enough to carry, he made a remark meant to unsettle her. It was casual in tone but laced with mockery, an attempt to highlight her quiet nature as weakness. The words hit her, but not in the way he expected. She felt the familiar twinge of tension, the rush of eyes turning toward them, sensing the conflict even before it fully arrived. Some people chuckled, some raised eyebrows, but most waited, curious to see what would happen next. He assumed she would shrink, that her silence meant submission. He was wrong. She felt a surge of calm determination, a quiet strength that had been building in her for years, without anyone noticing. She didn't respond immediately, letting the moment stretch, creating a small tension that made the air feel heavier. Inside, she reminded herself that this was not the first time someone had tried to put her down, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Yet she had learned the value of patience, of observing before acting. She also knew something that others didn't. Appearances could be deceiving, and the quiet ones often carried storms inside them that no one could predict. She chose to meet his gaze steadily, not with anger, but with a calm that carried its own weight. He, on the other hand, mistook her composure for uncertainty. He leaned in slightly, trying to assert dominance, perhaps unconsciously aware that the crowd was watching. There was a thrill in the attempt to humiliate, the kind of satisfaction some people get from feeling superior for a moment. He had done it many times before, with coworkers, strangers, and acquaintances. And yet there was something in her eyes that gave him pause, a subtle warning that she was not as fragile as she appeared. While the room waited, she allowed herself a brief internal smile. This was not about proving herself to him or even to anyone present. It was about recognizing the moment as an opportunity. Life had a way of testing people in small, public ways, and those who could remain composed often found a quiet victory where others only saw failure. She was ready, not with arrogance, but with readiness that came from knowing her own abilities. He continued, not noticing the shift in the atmosphere. He spoke louder, gesturing in a way meant to draw attention to her supposed weakness. The crowd responded, some with amusement, some with discomfort, sensing that the tension was more than just a casual exchange. She didn't speak. Instead, she let her presence fill the space. A silent confidence, that contrasted sharply with his forced bravado. Her mind drifted briefly to the piano. The instrument that had been her closest companion for as long as she could remember. The idea of it brought a warmth to her chest, calm reassurance that she carried within herself, even in the midst of public scrutiny. She remembered the countless hours spent practicing, the dedication, the quiet victories over challenges that no one else had witnessed. She realized that whatever happened next, she had a secret strength that no one could touch. The crowd, now fully attentive, waited for her reaction. Some assumed she would flee or respond with meekness. Others were curious, sensing the unusual calm that radiated from her. The man, confident in his strategy, did not yet recognize that his plan was about to fail. He continued his verbal assault, unaware that the quiet girl in front of him was preparing her own, far more powerful response. She finally spoke, but not with words. She stood up straighter, a gentle but noticeable shift that drew eyes toward her. Without a hint of hesitation, she moved toward the piano that had been tucked in a corner of the room. The keys gleamed under the lights, a silent invitation, a symbol of her hidden world. People whispered, wondering what she was about to do. The man's smirk faltered slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. She sat down at the piano, her posture perfect, her fingers hovering just above the keys. The room fell into a hush, the kind of silence that precedes something extraordinary. She took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the room around her, allowed her hands to find the notes she had played countless times in private. Each movement was confident, precise, yet flowing with emotion that could not be faked. The first notes rang out, soft but clear, drawing everyone's attention. In that moment, she felt a strange combination of vulnerability and power. The vulnerability came from being exposed in front of so many eyes, the pressure of public judgment. The power came from knowing that she was about to express herself in the purest way she knew, a language that didn't require words, explanations, or defenses. Music was her truth, and it was about to speak louder than anyone's attempts at humiliation. The man, who had intended to embarrass her, now felt a flicker of doubt. He listened, his earlier confidence wavering as the first notes reached him. The room seemed to shrink, all eyes drawn to the piano and the girl who sat before it. The sound was unexpected, filled with depth and emotion that made it impossible to look away. People shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, some holding their breath, captivated by the contrast between what they expected and what they were hearing. She played with a grace that could not be taught, a natural ability refined through years of dedication. Each note carried meaning. Each chord painted a picture of struggle, patience, and quiet determination. The music flowed effortlessly, yet it was clear that it was born from countless hours of practice and a deep connection to her inner self. People who had come expecting drama, gossip, or spectacle found themselves moved. Drawn into the story she told through sound, the man's face changed as he listened. The smirk was gone, replaced by a rare expression of realization and unease. He had underestimated her, assuming that silence meant weakness. Now faced with her talent, he recognized the mistake he had made. For a moment, there was no room for pride or superiority, only the stark reality that his attempt to humiliate had failed spectacularly. She didn't rush, didn't try to impress, didn't even glance at him. Her focus was entirely on the piano, on the music that was an extension of herself. The room was silent, not from fear or tension, but from respect, from awe at the unexpected brilliance that filled the space. She played, and in that playing, she claimed her own space, her own truth. Without a word spoken to justify herself, the story of that afternoon was just beginning. But even in these first moments, it was clear that something had shifted. She had entered a world that often judged by appearances and superficial confidence, and reminded everyone present that talent, patience, and quiet strength could speak louder than arrogance. The man who had tried to put her down now faced a reality he had not anticipated. And she, the quiet girl who had lived her life in the background, was about to reveal a side of herself that no one could ignore. In that room, amid the glances, whispers, and anticipation, she played on. She didn't know the full impact her music would have, but she felt it ripple through the audience, touching hearts in ways words never could. She was not seeking revenge, nor was she proving anything to anyone but herself. Yet, by simply being true to who she was and letting her talent shine, she had already changed the dynamics of the room forever. The quiet, reserved girl had just begun to speak, and her voice through the piano was impossible to ignore. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, charged with anticipation. Everyone could feel that something unusual was about to happen. The man who had tried to humiliate her was confident that he had set the stage perfectly. He leaned against a table, arms crossed, a smug expression on his face. His plan was simple: make her uncomfortable in front of everyone and watch her falter. But he had underestimated the depth of her calm, strength hidden beneath her quiet demeanor. She remained seated at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys. She could feel the heat of attention around her, the curious eyes of strangers, and the subtle shift in the crowd's energy. Some of them had laughed at the man's initial jibe, but now as they watched her, there was uncertainty. Something in her posture, in the stillness before she played, suggested that she was not easily shaken. Her heart beat steadily, not from fear, but from focus. She reminded herself that this moment was not about proving anything to anyone. It was about expressing herself, about turning an uncomfortable challenge into a chance to show the power of quiet determination. The man spoke again, louder this time, his words meant to mock her further. He asked if she even knew how to play, if she had any real talent at all. His tone carried a hint of cruelty, but also of disbelief. He assumed that silence meant weakness, that her calm face hid nothing of substance. What he did not realize was that she had faced judgment many times before, and each time she had learned to let her actions speak louder than words. She let the question hang in the air for a moment, not responding, letting the tension grow. People started to lean in, sensing a drama unfolding. A few whispers passed among the crowd. Some thought she might leave, that she would be embarrassed and retreat. Others were curious, sensing the quiet intensity of her presence. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, centering herself, taking in the room and all the judgments it contained. Music had always been her refuge, her companion through loneliness, stress, and the challenges of life. She trusted it to guide her now. Her fingers found the keys, light at first, like tentative steps, and then she began to play. The first notes were soft, careful, but deliberate, each one carrying a quiet confidence that immediately changed the mood of the room. The man frowned, shifting slightly as he realized that her playing was not what he had expected. The room's attention shifted as the music started to fill the air. People stopped talking, some even leaning forward instinctively, drawn to the sound. The first few bars were simple, yet there was an elegance and control in each note that betrayed the hours of practice she had invested in her skill. It was not flashy, not meant to impress through speed or volume, but it had a depth that could not be ignored. He tried to maintain his composure, expecting that the effect would be temporary, that her confidence would crumble under scrutiny. But as the music continued, his smirk faded, replaced by a furrowed brow and a growing sense of unease. He had intended to dominate the room, to make her falter, and now the tables were turning. She was captivating the audience, drawing them in with her talent and poise. Even the most skeptical onlookers could not deny the skill she displayed, nor the emotion she poured into each note. The piece she played began to shift subtly. What started as gentle, controlled notes evolved into something more expressive, more personal. Each chord carried a story, each progression hinted at challenges faced and overcome. Those who listened felt as though they were witnessing not just a performance, but a glimpse into her soul. The man watched, silent now, realizing that his attempt to humiliate had awakened something powerful instead of fear. There was no arrogance in her playing, no desire to shame or prove herself to him. Her music spoke for her in ways that words could not. Some in the crowd were moved to tears. They could feel the authenticity, the life experience woven into every phrase. It was not the loudness of the music that drew them, but its honesty, its sincerity. She had taken what could have been a moment of embarrassment and turned it into an expression of artistry and humanity. The man shifted uncomfortably, aware that the room no longer belonged to him, aware that he was losing control of the situation he had orchestrated so confidently. She noticed the subtle reactions around her, but kept her focus on the piano. Her breathing remained steady, her posture strong. She had learned over the years that confidence was not about being loud or dominating, but about understanding oneself and letting actions align with that understanding. The man's presence, once intimidating, was now irrelevant. He could no longer provoke her because he did not have the knowledge of who she truly was, and she did not need his validation to continue. Her music began to rise in intensity, the notes flowing faster, more confidently, yet always precise. She was telling a story, one of resilience, patience, and quiet triumph. People who had doubted her or ignored her before now watched in awe. They could not help but be drawn into the narrative she wove, a story that needed no words, only the universal language of music. The man tried to speak, tried to regain control, but no one listened. He was no longer the center of attention. She was. She allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, a small internal acknowledgement of her own strength. Not for revenge, not for pride, but simply for recognizing the value of her persistence, her dedication, and her refusal to be diminished by someone else's arrogance. The audience felt this too, sensing the authenticity and integrity in her performance. The man who had assumed he could humiliate her effortlessly was now confronted with the undeniable reality of her talent and composure. Time seemed to stretch as she continued playing. The music transformed the atmosphere completely. What had begun as a tense, uncomfortable situation became a shared experience. A moment where everyone present was connected through the sound she produced. People forgot about judgment, about appearances, about rivalry. They were captivated purely by the expression of someone who had been underestimated and had risen above it gracefully. The man's face showed confusion, disbelief, and a touch of shame. He had tried to manipulate the situation to his advantage, but he had been completely outmatched. Not through force, not through confrontation, but through the quiet power of talent, patience, and authenticity. He realized that his attempt to assert dominance had only highlighted his own lack of understanding and depth. For the first time in the gathering, he was not in control. She played on, undeterred by his presence or the expectations of the room. Her confidence was rooted not in external approval, but in her own knowledge of her abilities. The music told a story of someone who had endured, someone who had grown through challenges, someone whose strength came from within, rather than from the need to prove something to others. The crowd was silent, captivated by the unexpected beauty of the performance, by the revelation that the quiet girl they had overlooked possessed such profound talent. Every chord she struck was precise, yet filled with emotion. Each passage conveyed a depth of feeling that could not be faked or imitated. People could sense the years of dedication, the personal struggles, and the inner resilience that had brought her to this moment. The man who had believed himself the master of appearances and influence now understood that true mastery came from commitment, passion, and the courage to remain authentic even in the face of ridicule. The performance reached its peak, a moment of intensity that was both powerful and controlled. The audience felt the crescendo of emotion, the culmination of a story told without words. They were swept away, moved, and inspired by the courage it took to remain oneself when challenged, and the grace with which she had turned a moment of potential humiliation into a demonstration of genuine talent. When she finally allowed the music to fade, the room remained in a hushed silence for a moment. People were processing what they had just experienced. The man who had tried to humiliate her stood frozen, his plan completely undone. He had underestimated not only her skill, but also her strength of character. The room, once filled with expectation and tension, now held admiration and respect. Her response had not been confrontational, not a public retaliation, but a demonstration of authenticity that no one could deny. She remained seated, composed and serene, aware of the impact she had made. She did not gloat, did not seek attention, and did not respond to the man directly. The music itself had spoken volumes, and that was enough. The audience slowly began to acknowledge her, some with applause, some with nods of silent respect. They understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a quiet triumph that transcended the typical social games of superiority and humiliation. The man finally spoke, but his words lacked the confidence and authority he had intended. He realized that he had been outmaneuvered not through confrontation, but through skill, patience, and the quiet power of authenticity. His attempt to humiliate had inadvertently revealed the truth about her. That talent, determination, and composure could not only withstand judgment, but could transform it into admiration. She had turned a moment designed to belittle her into a powerful demonstration of inner strength and artistry as the crowd slowly returned to normal conversation. The atmosphere had irrevocably changed. People who had doubted her, ignored her, or assumed she was weak now saw her in a new light. The man, humbled, could no longer dismiss her. She had shown, without words, that true strength often lies in quiet resilience, and that genuine. Talent is impossible to hide. The story of the attempted humiliation had become a story of empowerment, one that would be remembered not for the mockery intended, but for the brilliance revealed. She continued to play, letting the music flow naturally from her fingers. Each note was deliberate, each chord filled with feeling. The room had transformed completely from the tense, judgmental atmosphere it had been moments ago. People who had once whispered and watched with amusement now leaned in, silent, captivated by what they were hearing. Her performance was no longer just a demonstration of talent. It had become a story, a living expression of her life experiences, her struggles, and her quiet determination. The man who had attempted to humiliate her remained frozen. His confidence had evaporated, replaced by a dawning realization that he had misjudged her entirely. Every subtle shift in her music conveyed strength, resilience, and a depth of emotion he could not comprehend. He had tried to control the moment with words and gestures, but her music had turned the tables completely. She didn't need to argue, didn't need to defend herself. The truth of her skill and the authenticity of her presence spoke louder than any confrontation could. She played with a delicate intensity, starting softly, then gradually building the music into a rich, full-bodied sound. Her fingers danced over the keys with precision, yet each movement carried a subtle emotion that seemed to reach into the hearts of everyone in the room. People were no longer focused on the earlier tension. They were focused entirely on the music, feeling a connection to something they had not expected. They were witnessing a story unfold. A story told entirely without words. The man shifted uncomfortably, trying to regain his composure. But the more he watched, the more he understood that this was beyond him. His attempt to belittle her had failed completely. The audience, who had once shared in his amusement, was now wholly absorbed in her performance. Their eyes followed her hands as they moved gracefully across the piano, their ears drinking in every note, and their hearts responding to the emotion conveyed through the music. What he had meant to be a public embarrassment had become a powerful demonstration of her inner strength and mastery. Her music began to rise in tempo, a wave of sound that carried energy and emotion together. She was telling a story of challenges faced and overcome, of patience and persistence, of resilience and quiet victory. Each note was a reflection of her journey, each chord a testament to her dedication. The audience felt the intensity and authenticity, sensing the depth behind every sound. The room was transformed into a space of shared experience, where the barriers between people and their assumptions dissolved in the presence of pure expression. As she played, she allowed herself to feel the music fully. It was not about revenge or showing superiority. It was about honesty and presence. Every movement of her hands, every rise and fall in dynamics, every pause and breath carried intention. She was communicating her story in a language universal and unpretentious, touching the hearts of those who listened. The man, once the center of the room, now felt like an intruder in the world she had created with her music. The crescendo of the piece approached, and with it, the emotional intensity in the room deepened. People felt an almost tangible shift in energy. They were no longer just observers. They were participants in a shared emotional journey. She played with both precision and feeling, balancing technical mastery with emotional depth. Each note seemed to carry a weight, a story of persistence and resilience that resonated with everyone present. The music had become a bridge, connecting her experience with the audience's emotions in a way that words never could. The man tried to interrupt, to assert himself, perhaps hoping to redirect attention or regain control, but it was too late. She had captured the room completely. Her music had become a force that could not be ignored. A powerful testament to the idea that true strength and talent need no boasting or confrontation. The audience was moved not only by her skill, but by the authenticity and vulnerability she conveyed. They could sense the effort, the dedication, and the quiet strength that had brought her to this moment. She allowed herself a subtle smile as she noticed the reactions around her. There was no arrogance in it, only quiet acknowledgement of the shift that had occurred. She had taken what could have been a moment of humiliation and turned it into an opportunity to reveal the truth of her abilities. The audience's attention was wholly on her, yet she remained grounded, fully present in the music rather than the reactions it evoked. This was a moment of personal triumph, not public vindication, and she carried it with grace. The music softened for a brief moment, a gentle pause that allowed the audience to catch their breath, only to swell again, stronger and more expressive than before. Each return to sound carried renewed energy, as if she were telling the world that no challenge could diminish her spirit. The room seemed to breathe with her, the audience leaning in, hanging on every note. Her playing was no longer a mere performance. It was a conversation between her heart and the hearts of everyone listening. The man, now visibly unsettled, could not comprehend how she had completely disarmed his attempt to belittle her. He had relied on words, on intimidation, on social dominance, but none of that mattered now. Her music had become the ultimate equalizer, demonstrating mastery, courage, and authenticity. He had assumed that silence and humility meant weakness, but she had revealed the opposite, that patience, preparation, and quiet confidence could triumph where arrogance failed. The audience responded instinctively. Some were teary-eyed, moved by the emotion conveyed in each phrase. Others sat in awe, unable to take their eyes off the piano and the woman whose playing seemed to breathe life into the room. The music transcended ordinary experience, making people forget their own judgments or preconceptions, even the earlier tension. They were caught in the moment, fully present and fully affected. She continued, her hands moving effortlessly, yet with care and precision. Every key pressed was intentional, every phrase carefully shaped. She had learned that true artistry was not just about skill, but about communicating something authentic, something that resonated on a deeper level. That was what she was doing now, without effort, without self-consciousness. She was simply being herself, and in doing so, she had become extraordinary. The man's discomfort grew. He realized that his attempt to manipulate the moment had not only failed, but had highlighted his own lack of understanding and empathy. He had been so focused on dominating the situation that he failed to see the depth of her character and talent. His pride had blinded him to the reality that true strength was quiet, resilient, and self-sufficient. She had demonstrated it without confrontation, without boasting, and without needing anyone's approval. As the piece neared its final sections, she played with an intensity and clarity that was breathtaking. The audience felt the culmination of emotion, the resolution of a story told entirely through music. Her fingers moved across the keys with fluidity, precision, and feeling, creating an experience that was at once technical and deeply moving. People could sense the journey she had taken, the obstacles overcome, and the inner strength that had allowed her to rise above the challenge posed by the man who had tried to humiliate her. When the last note lingered in the air, the room remained silent for a heartbeat longer. The impact of what they had just witnessed was not immediate applause, but a collective pause. A moment of reflection, a recognition of the power of authenticity and talent. She had commanded attention without arrogance, conveyed emotion without words, and revealed strength without aggression. The man who had sought to embarrass her could only stand there, humbled, watching as she quietly, effortlessly, claimed the space she had always deserved. As the audience slowly began to react, a ripple of appreciation spread throughout the room. Some offered timid claps, others stood in silent acknowledgement, all of them changed in some small way by the experience. She remained seated, serene and composed, feeling a sense of calm satisfaction. She had not needed to fight or argue. She had simply let her talent and authenticity speak for themselves. The room had been transformed by her music, by her quiet strength, and by the honesty she conveyed through every note. The man finally stepped back. His earlier confidence gone, replaced by a mix of humility and disbelief. He had underestimated her completely and had learned, perhaps painfully, that true strength does not come from words or dominance, but from mastery, patience, and authenticity. She had faced his challenge with grace, turned potential humiliation into a powerful moment of expression, and captivated everyone present. The story of her quiet triumph was only beginning, and the resonance of her performance would be felt long after the final note faded. The room had completely changed. The earlier tension and whispering had disappeared, replaced by complete focus on her and the piano. Every person in the audience was captivated, drawn into the depth of her music. She had begun softly, but the piece had grown in complexity and emotion, weaving together technique, feeling, and personal expression. It was impossible to ignore. It held the attention of everyone present. The man who had tried to humiliate her now felt the weight of his misjudgment pressing down. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by confusion and awe. Her fingers moved with precision and fluidity, yet every note carried feeling. The audience could sense that she was not just playing music, but telling a story, one that had lived inside her for years. It was a story of perseverance, quiet strength, and the kind of resilience that does not boast, but simply exists. People felt her journey through the music, the struggles she had faced, hours of practice, the quiet victories no one had ever seen. They were listening not just to notes, but to life itself expressed through sound. The man shifted uneasily, realizing that the confidence he had exuded moments ago was meaningless here. She did not need to confront him directly or respond with words. Her music did all the speaking. Every crescendo, every subtle pause, every delicate phrase conveyed what words could not. The audience could sense it and responded, completely absorbed. Some leaned forward, some closed their eyes, some sat motionless, drinking in the music. The atmosphere was heavy with emotion, a shared experience that left no room for mockery or arrogance. Her piece, evolved with an energy, was both controlled and expressive. She moved from gentle, flowing passages into more complex, dramatic sequences. Her technique was flawless, but it was the emotion behind each movement that held everyone captive. She was not performing for attention or approval. She was performing because it was an extension of herself. Her deepest thoughts and feelings transformed into music. The audience could feel it. They were swept into her world, understanding her without needing explanation. The man, who had planned to make her the center of ridicule, now found himself entirely powerless. He could not interrupt, could not regain attention, could not undo what she had done. The room was hers, not because she had claimed it with force, but because she had earned it through talent, authenticity, and composure. He had underestimated her, thinking that outward quietness meant weakness, but he had been completely wrong. True strength, he now realized, was not loud or aggressive. It was quiet, resilient, and deeply grounded in skill and character. People around the room were clearly moved. Some had tears in their eyes, touched by the honesty and depth of her performance. Others were speechless, absorbing the powerful display of skill and emotion. It was impossible not to be affected. Her music had become more than notes on a page. It was a reflection of life itself, of struggles and triumphs, of resilience in the face of judgment. The audience could feel the authenticity, the human truth behind the performance, and it left them in awe. As the piece progressed, she allowed the music to rise to its emotional peak. The dynamics built naturally, the rhythm and tempo carrying a sense of inevitability and grace. Every movement of her hands seemed effortless yet intentional. She was in complete control, yet she allowed the music to breathe, to carry its own message. It was a perfect balance of skill and heart, a combination that made it impossible for anyone to look away or remain unaffected. The man watched, silent now. Realizing the enormity of what he had misjudged, her performance reached moments of intricate brilliance. Notes that danced delicately yet with precise timing. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, listening to every detail, marveling at the interplay of skill and emotion. People who had entered the room ready to judge were now completely captivated, experiencing something beyond expectation. She had transformed a potential moment of humiliation into an unforgettable display of talent, humility, and human expression. Even those who had been skeptical or indifferent were now fully attentive. They could sense the personal story behind each note, the dedication and resilience required to reach this level of mastery. It was not flashy for show, but powerful in its sincerity. Every person present felt the honesty of her music, the emotional resonance that came from years of practice, dedication, and quiet perseverance. She had created a moment that was both personal and universal, touching hearts in ways that words never could. The man tried to regain composure, to maintain the air of superiority he had relied on, but it was too late. His voice, gestures, and confidence were powerless against the reality of her talent. He had attempted to humiliate her publicly, but she had turned it into an opportunity to reveal her true self. He could not undo the impact of her music, nor could he erase the recognition that was forming around her. She had captivated the room completely, and her presence was now undeniable as the piece continued. She allowed her emotions to guide her, expressing a range of feelings from subtle melancholy to intense triumph. Every shift in tempo, every chord, every note conveyed depth and meaning. The audience could feel the transformation happening in real time, the way music could communicate beyond words, and they responded instinctively. Some were moved to tears, some sat in awe, some whispered softly to each other, unable to comprehend the power of what they were witnessing. Her music had become a shared human experience, connecting everyone in the room in a way that was impossible to ignore. The man's earlier amusement and superiority had completely vanished. He understood now that her strength and skill were not dependent on anyone's approval. He had underestimated her quiet determination, her hours of practice, and the depth of her emotional intelligence. She had faced his challenge with grace and had demonstrated something far greater than he could have imagined. It was not just talent that captivated the audience, but the authenticity and courage behind it. She moved into the final passages of the piece, with a calm confidence that resonated with everyone present. The music swelled, building toward its climax with precision and emotion. Each note was carefully chosen, each phrase deliberate, yet the overall effect was natural, effortless, and deeply moving. The room felt alive, each person caught in the emotional arc she was creating. She had not needed to shout or argue. Her music had communicated everything she wished to express. As the final notes lingered, profound silence fell over the room. The impact of what they had just witnessed was overwhelming. People processed the performance in their own way, some with silent admiration, some with tears, some with expressions of awe and respect. The man who had tried to humiliate her stood motionless, humbled by the depth of her skill and the power of her quiet strength. His attempt to dominate and belittle had been completely reversed. Leaving him aware of the gap between superficial confidence and authentic talent, she remained seated, composed and serene, letting the music fade naturally. There was no need for a dramatic gesture or verbal declaration. Her performance had already spoken volumes. The audience, now fully attentive and moved, began to react with applause, slowly at first, then swelling into enthusiastic recognition. People were acknowledging not just her technical skill, but the courage, authenticity, and resilience that had brought her to this moment. She had transformed a situation meant to humiliate her into an unforgettable celebration of human strength and talent. The man finally attempted to speak, but his words were hollow in comparison to the impact she had made. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that true power is not about intimidation or dominance, but about mastery, authenticity, and the ability to rise above challenges with grace. The audience had witnessed something extraordinary, a quiet, unassuming person using her skill and inner strength to turn an awkward, potentially humiliating situation into a moment of beauty and inspiration. She had not only survived the challenge, but had redefined the entire room's perception of her. In the process, as the applause continued, she felt a quiet satisfaction. It was not about proving anything to the man or the audience, but about honoring her own dedication and ability. She had let her talent shine in its purest form, untouched by ego or confrontation. The room had been transformed, and those present had witnessed the power of authenticity, talent, and quiet resilience. The man who had intended to belittle her now stood humbled, learning firsthand that underestimating someone based on outward appearances can lead to unexpected and humbling revelations. She had shown without words that true strength does not boast, but quietly commands respect through action, skill, and the courage to be oneself. The music had faded, leaving the room in a quiet, reflective silence. Every person present was absorbing the impact of what they had just witnessed. It was not just a performance, it was a revelation. The young woman at the piano had taken a moment intended to humiliate her and transformed it into a display of artistry, authenticity, and strength that none could ignore. Her calm demeanor, her skill, and the emotion she poured into every note had left a lasting impression. The audience slowly began to react, first with tentative applause, then with a swelling wave of appreciation. People stood, some wiping tears from their eyes, others nodding in silent admiration. There was a sense of collective awe, a recognition that they had witnessed something rare and extraordinary. She remained seated, composed, letting the room's reaction unfold naturally. She did not seek praise. She did not need to defend herself. The truth of her talent and the honesty of her performance spoke louder than any words ever could. The man who had tried to humiliate her stood awkwardly. His earlier confidence was gone, replaced by a mix of disbelief and humility. He had thought he could assert control over the situation, make her falter, and demonstrate his superiority. Instead, he had been